Rain lashed against the marble angel of Sophia's grave. Gabriel, a man who commanded the city's underworld with an iron fist, froze. A frail child sat in the mud, clutching the headstone. When she looked up and whispered why she was crying, his ruthless empire shattered into dust. Death is a quiet companion for a man who builds his fortune on blood. For 34-year-old Gabriel Rossi, the undisputed head of the Chicago syndicate, violence was simply the currency of his trade. He commanded thousands of men, controlled the docks from the south side to the commercial ports, and held politicians in his bespoke pockets. Men trembled when he walked into a room. Rival bosses lowered their eyes in his presence. But every year, on the 14th of October, the untouchable mob boss became nothing more than a broken father. It was a blistering, unforgiving autumn afternoon. The sky over Oakwood's private estate was the color of bruised iron, weeping a torrential downpour that soaked through Gabriel's black cashmere overcoat. He stood 30 yards away from the Rossi family plot, a sprawling mausoleum of white marble and dark iron gates. His men, 4 heavily armed enforcers led by his second-in-command, Leo, kept their distance. They knew better than to crowd him today. Today was the 3rd anniversary of the day Gabriel's soul had died. 3 years ago, a car bomb intended for Gabriel had detonated prematurely in the driveway of his estate. Gabriel had survived with a few broken ribs and shattered glass in his arm. His 7-year-old daughter, Sophia, who had been running out the front door to greet him with a drawing she made in school, had not. Gabriel's jaw tightened as he stepped onto the manicured grass, the rain slicking his dark hair to his forehead. He carried no umbrella. He believed he deserved the cold. He deserved the biting chill of the wind, just as he deserved the agonizing emptiness in his chest. As he approached the clearing where Sophia's individual headstone rested beneath the arms of a weeping willow, Gabriel's steps faltered. He stopped. His hand instinctively drifted toward the custom-engraved Sig Sauer holstered beneath his coat. There was someone at the grave. It wasn't an assassin. It wasn't a rival from the Gallagher syndicate coming to desecrate the site. It was a little girl. She looked no older than 7 or 8, engulfed in an oversized yellow raincoat that offered little protection against the torrential downpour. She was sitting directly in the mud, her small knees pulled up to her chest, her arms wrapped tight around Sophia's marble headstone as if she were trying to hug the cold stone to keep it warm. Gabriel's breath hitched. For a fleeting, agonizing second, his mind played a cruel trick on him. Sophia. But no, Sophia's hair had been dark like his. This child had wet, straggly blonde curls plastered to her pale cheeks. "Boss." Leo's gruff voice came through the earpiece hidden in Gabriel's ear. "You want us to clear the area? Remove the kid? Stand down." Gabriel murmured, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Do not move a muscle." Gabriel stepped closer, his polished leather shoes sinking into the mud. He moved silently, the predatory grace that made him a lethal fighter now entirely focused on not startling the child. As he closed the distance, he could hear it, a quiet, heart-wrenching sobbing that barely cut through the sound of the rain. He stood over her, casting a massive shadow that blocked out the worst of the wind. "You shouldn't be out here in the rain, Piccola," Gabriel said. His voice, usually sharp enough to cut glass, was surprisingly soft. It was a voice he hadn't used in 3 years. "It's cold." The little girl flinched, turning her head to look up at him. Her eyes were massive, a striking shade of hazel, rimmed red from crying. She didn't look terrified of the towering, scarred man standing above her. She just looked incredibly, profoundly sad. She wiped her nose with the back of a mud-stained sleeve. "I had to come back," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I sneaked out. My mom doesn't know." Gabriel slowly knelt, uncaring that the freezing mud was ruining his trousers. He rested his forearms on his knees, bringing himself down to her eye level. "Why did you sneak out to come here? Do you know who rests here?" The girl nodded slowly. She reached out, her tiny, pale fingers tracing the engraved letters of Sophia's name, Sophia Elena Rossi, beloved daughter. "I don't know her face," the girl said quietly, a tear mixing with the raindrops on her cheek. "But I know she's lonely down there." Gabriel's chest tightened painfully. He swallowed the lump in his throat. Who are you? I'm Mia, she said. She sniffled, looking directly into Gabriel's dark, dangerous eyes. Are you her daddy? Gabriel felt a tear of his own break free, sliding hot down his cold cheek. Yes, I am her daddy. Mia's bottom lip quivered. She uncrossed her arms from the headstone and brought her right hand to her own chest, pressing her palm flat against the bright yellow plastic of her raincoat, right over her heart. I'm sorry, Mia whispered, her voice breaking into a fragile sob. I didn't want to cry, but she's crying. My chest hurts so much when I come near here. The girl inside me, she tells me she misses you, Papa. The world stopped spinning. The rain ceased to make a sound. Gabriel couldn't breathe. He stared at the child's hand pressed against her chest. The girl inside me, 3 years ago, in the chaotic, blood-soaked aftermath of the bombing, the doctors at Mercy General had told Gabriel that Sophia's brain activity had ceased, but her heart, her strong, perfect little heart, was still beating. In a haze of unimaginable grief, Gabriel had signed the paperwork. He had authorized an anonymous organ donation, demanding only that the recipient be a child on the brink of death. He had never wanted to know who took it. He couldn't bear the thought of seeing another child live while his daughter was lowered into the earth. Papa. Sophia was the only person in the world who had called him that. Gabriel let out a choked, broken sound. The ruthless Mafia boss, the man who had ordered the execution of 30 men without blinking, collapsed forward. He wrapped his massive arms around the little girl in the yellow raincoat, pulling her small, fragile body into his chest. He buried his face in her wet blonde hair and wept. Against his own chest, he could feel it. Thump, 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 his daughter's heartbeat. Gabriel didn't know how long he stayed, kneeling in the mud, holding the child who carried his daughter's life inside her chest. For the first time in 36 months, the deafening roar of vengeance in his mind was silenced, replaced entirely by the steady, rhythmic drumming against Mia's ribs. He pulled back gently, his large hands resting on her small shoulders. Her hazel eyes stared up at him, wide and understanding in a way no 7-year-old should ever have to be. Mia! The frantic, terrified scream tore through the heavy curtain of rain, breaking the fragile spell. Gabriel's instincts, honed by decades of survival in the criminal underworld, snapped instantly back into place. He rose to his full height in one fluid motion, shielding the child behind his broad frame, his hand resting on the grip of his weapon. Through the mist and the weeping willows, a woman was running. She was slipping in the wet grass, her coat unbuttoned and flapping wildly in the wind. She was breathing heavily, panic radiating from every desperate line of her body. Behind Gabriel, Leo and Dante materialized like ghosts from the shadows, their hands inside their coats, eyes locked on the approaching figure. Gabriel raised a single finger, silently ordering his men to stand down. The woman skidded to a halt a few yards away, her eyes wild as she took in the scene. She looked to be in her late 20s. Her hair was a chaotic tumble of wet, dark waves, and her pale skin was stark against the bleak backdrop of the cemetery. She wasn't dressed like the wealthy patrons who usually visited Oakwoods. Her boots were worn, and her coat was cheap wool, soaked through. "Mia!" the woman gasped, her voice cracking with terror as she spotted the yellow raincoat peeking out from behind Gabriel's massive legs. She took a step forward. "Oh my God, Mia. Come here. Get away from him." "Mommy," Mia said softly, stepping around Gabriel but not running. The woman Evelyn Hayes didn't wait. She lunged forward, grabbing Mia by the arm and pulling her fiercely into her chest, wrapping her arms around the girl as if shielding her from a blast. Evelyn's eyes darted to Gabriel, then to the heavily armed men standing silently in the periphery. She wasn't stupid. Growing up on the rougher edges of the South Side, she knew what power looked like. She knew the expensive cut of Gabriel's suit, the calculating coldness in his guard's eyes, and the silent, deadly aura that surrounded them all. "I'm sorry," Evelyn choked out, backing up slowly, keeping Mia pressed tightly behind her. She slipped away from me at the florist near the gate. She has a habit of wandering. We're leaving right now. We won't bother you again." Gabriel took a slow, deliberate step forward. Evelyn instinctively took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. "What is your name?" Gabriel asked. His voice was no longer the soft murmur he had used with Mia. It was the low, resonant baritone of a man who demanded the truth. "Evelyn," she said, her chin lifting slightly despite the visible tremor in her hands. "Evelyn Hayes. Please, mister. She's just a kid. She didn't mean to trespass." "October 14th, Gabriel stated, his dark eyes burning into hers. 3 years ago, your daughter was a patient at Mercy General, dilated cardiomyopathy. She was placed on the critical list, given hours to live." Evelyn froze. The blood drained completely from her face. She pulled Mia tighter against her legs. "How? How do you know that?" The files were sealed. The donor was supposed to be completely anonymous. Gabriel's jaw clenched. "Because I am the one who signed those files, Miss Hayes." Evelyn's breath hitched in the freezing air. She looked at the sprawling, opulent gravestone behind Gabriel, then back at the imposing, terrifying man standing before her. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The anonymous donor who had given her daughter a second chance at life wasn't just some grieving suburban family. It was him. "It was your daughter," Evelyn whispered, the fight suddenly draining out of her, replaced by a profound, overwhelming wave of gratitude and sorrow. Tears welled in her eyes. "Oh my God, I never knew how to thank you. I prayed for you every single night. You saved my baby's life." "I didn't save her," Gabriel replied, his voice rough. "My Sophia did." A tense silence fell over the graveyard, broken only by the steady drum of the rain. For a moment, they were just two grieving parents, one who had lost her world, and one who had nearly lost hers, bound by the beating heart of a child, caught in the middle. But Gabriel Rossi did not have the luxury of uninterrupted grief. Out of the corner of his eye, Gabriel caught a flash of light reflecting off glass. His head snapped toward the eastern perimeter of the cemetery. Parked just beyond the wrought iron gates, half hidden in the shadow of an old oak tree, was a sleek, black Lincoln Navigator. The engine wasn't running, but the tinted window in the back was rolled down exactly 2 inches. Gabriel's blood ran cold. The Gallagher Syndicate. They had been probing his defenses for weeks, looking for a weakness, waiting to see if the anniversary of his daughter's death would leave him vulnerable. And now, they were watching him. They had seen the untouchable boss of Chicago drop to his knees in the mud for a random little girl. They had seen the emotion on his face. In Gabriel's world, an attachment was a death sentence. To the men in that SUV, Evelyn and Mia weren't a miracle. They were leverage. "Leo," Gabriel said softly, his eyes never leaving the Lincoln. "I see them, boss." Leo replied over the earpiece, already moving to flank the right side of the clearing, drawing his weapon. Evelyn noticed the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The melancholic tension had vanished, replaced by something razor-sharp and deadly. She saw Gabriel's men reaching under their coats. Panic flared in her chest. "What's going on? What are you doing?" Gabriel turned his full attention back to Evelyn. His eyes were hard, devoid of the warmth they had held just moments ago. He closed the distance between them in 2 massive strides. Evelyn tried to back away, but Gabriel grabbed her by the upper arm, not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to hold her in place. "You and Mia are in severe danger, Evelyn," Gabriel said, his voice a rapid, urgent command. "There are men watching us right now who will use anything I care about to destroy me. By coming here today, you just painted a target on your daughter's back." Evelyn's eyes widened in horror. No, we have nothing to do with you. Let me go." "It's too late for that," Gabriel growled, pulling her firmly toward the armored Maybach parked on the gravel path behind the mausoleum. "If you walk out of these gates alone, you will be dead by morning, and they will take the girl. You can't do this. You're crazy." Evelyn fought against his grip, kicking at his shins, desperate to protect her child. But Gabriel was a wall of muscle and stone. He stopped and grabbed her by both shoulders, forcing her to look into his eyes. "Listen to me," he commanded, his voice vibrating with an intensity that chilled her to the bone. "My daughter's heart beats inside that little girl. I failed to protect Sophia. I will burn this entire city to the ground before I let anyone stop that heart from beating again. Now get in the car." Evelyn looked at Mia, who was shivering in the cold, staring up at them with frightened eyes. She had spent 3 years working double shifts, fighting tooth and nail to keep Mia safe and healthy. Now, she was staring into the eyes of a monster who was promising to do the same. With a trembling breath, Evelyn scooped Mia up into her arms and ran toward the bulletproof doors of Gabriel's car. The bulletproof Maybach tore through the torrential rain, leaving the sprawling graveyard far behind. Inside the soundproof cabin, the silence was suffocating. Evelyn sat rigid, clutching Mia to her chest, her eyes darting across the dark-tinted windows as if expecting a hail of bullets at any second. Across from them, Gabriel Rossi sat completely still, his dark eyes fixed on the city blurring past. He looked less like a savior and more like a predator evaluating his territory. They bypassed Evelyn's cramped 2-bedroom rental in Pilsen entirely, heading north toward Highland Park. 40 minutes later, the massive iron gates of Gabriel's lakeside fortress groaned open. The estate was a sprawling compound of gray stone and slate, surrounded by 12-foot walls and patrolled by armed guards holding Belgian Malinois dogs. It wasn't a home. It was a citadel. As the car idled to a stop beneath a cavernous portico, Evelyn finally found her voice. It trembled, but the fierce, protective anger of a mother cut through her fear. "You can't just kidnap us," she hissed, keeping her voice low so as not to frighten Mia, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder. "I have a job. I have rent. Mia has a life. You're insane if you think I'm staying in this Mafia compound." Gabriel didn't blink. "Your apartment in Pilsen is already compromised. By tomorrow morning, Declan Gallagher's men will have kicked in your door. If you are there, they will put a bullet in your head and take the child to use as a bargaining chip. You are not a prisoner here, Evelyn. You are surviving. Mia requires a strict medical regimen." Evelyn fired back, her panic rising. "She takes tacrolimus twice a day to stop her body from rejecting the heart. We go to Northwestern Memorial Hospital for bi-weekly blood panels. You can't just lock a transplant patient in a fortress. She'll die without her doctors." For the first time since the graveyard, a flicker of genuine emotion crossed Gabriel's stoic features, a flash of pure, unadulterated terror at the thought of that heart stopping. He leaned forward, his massive frame closing the distance between them, smelling of rain, gunpowder, and expensive cedar cologne. "I have billions of dollars at my disposal, Miss Hayes," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a low, absolute rumble. "I own the chairman of the board at Northwestern Memorial. By the time you wake up tomorrow, Dr. Arthur Pendleton, the chief of pediatric cardiology, will have a fully equipped, sterile clinic set up in the east wing of this house. Her medication will be flown in directly from the manufacturer. She will not miss a single pill. She will not miss a single blood draw." Evelyn stared at him, the reality of his power crashing over her. He wasn't exaggerating. He was a man who reshaped reality to fit his will. Over the next 2 weeks, the Highland Park estate became a gilded cage. Evelyn and Mia were given the entire top floor of the south wing. True to his word, Gabriel transformed a massive guest suite into a state-of-the-art medical facility. Dr. Pendleton arrived every Tuesday and Friday, flanked by Gabriel's heavily armed enforcers, to check on Mia's vitals. But the hardest adjustment wasn't the guards or the isolation. It was the haunting, unspoken grief that saturated the walls. Gabriel avoided them. He worked in his ground-floor study, orchestrating a brutal shadow war against the Gallagher syndicate, leaving early and returning late. Yet, Evelyn felt his presence everywhere. She noticed that all the sharp corners of the furniture in the main living areas had been padded. She noticed a dusty, untouched playroom at the end of the hall, its door locked tight. One evening, unable to sleep, Evelyn wandered down to the massive industrial kitchen for a glass of water. She stopped short in the doorway. Gabriel was sitting at the marble island, a glass of amber whiskey in his hand. He wasn't wearing his usual armor of a tailored suit. He was in a simple black t-shirt and dark trousers, looking exhausted, the shadows under his eyes stark in the dim overhead light. On the floor, a few feet away, Completely unaware of the dangerous man brooding above her, Mia was sitting cross-legged, drawing on a piece of printer paper with a blue crayon. Evelyn held her breath, ready to intervene, but Gabriel simply watched the child. His gaze was anchored to her chest, watching the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of her breathing. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, mesmerized by the drop. Mia stopped drawing and looked up. "Do you like the ocean, Mr. Gabriel?" she asked casually. Gabriel's grip on his whiskey glass tightened until his knuckles turned white. I do, Piccola. Why? I draw oceans a lot now, Mia said, tilting her head. I never used to. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can hear the waves. It makes me feel safe. A choked, ragged breath escaped Gabriel's lips. He closed his eyes, turning his head away. Evelyn's heart broke. She knew, from the desperate, late-night internet searches she had done over the years, that cellular memory in transplant patients was a debated medical phenomenon. But seeing Gabriel's reaction, she realized the devastating truth. Sophia had loved the ocean. Evelyn stepped into the kitchen, her bare feet silent on the tiles. She walked over to Mia, gently picking up the drawing. "It's time for bed, sweetie. You need your rest." Mia nodded, yawning. "Good night, Mr. Gabriel." Gabriel didn't look back at them, but he gave a curt, tight nod. "Good night, Mia." After putting Mia to bed, Evelyn walked back down. Gabriel was still there, the whiskey untouched. She poured herself a glass of water and sat on the stool opposite him. "You're torturing yourself," Evelyn said softly. Gabriel finally looked at her. The cold, ruthless mob boss was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out father. "She used to drag me to the lakefront every Sunday. Rain or shine. She collected sea glass." His voice was barely a whisper. "I hear her in your daughter's voice, Evelyn. I see her in the way she breathes. It is a miracle, and it is a waking nightmare." Evelyn reached across the marble counter, her small, warm hand hesitantly covering his large, scarred one. "She isn't Sophia, Gabriel, but she's alive because of her. You gave me my entire world back. Don't let the grief make you blind to the life you saved." Gabriel looked down at her hand, feeling the surprising warmth of her touch. For 3 years, no one had dared to touch him with anything but fear or violence. The physical contact sent an unfamiliar jolt through his chest. He met Evelyn's eyes, fierce, resilient, and deeply empathetic. Before he could respond, the heavy mahogany doors of the kitchen burst open. Leo, Gabriel's second-in-command, strode in, his face a mask of grim urgency. He didn't even apologize for the intrusion. "Boss," Leo said, his voice tight. "We have a massive problem." Gabriel's demeanor flipped instantly from vulnerable to lethal. He stood up, towering over the island, his hand instinctively dropping to the holster at his waist. "Report. It's Gallagher," Leo said, glancing nervously at Evelyn before turning his focus entirely to his boss. 10 minutes ago, his crew firebombed an apartment building in Pilsen, specifically Unit 4B. Evelyn dropped her water glass. It shattered against the tile floor, water and glass exploding outward. Unit 4B was her apartment. "Was anyone hurt?" Evelyn gasped, the blood draining from her face. "The building was evacuated in time by the fire department. But your unit is ash," Leo replied. He turned back to Gabriel. "They left a message spray-painted on the alley wall below. We know what you're hiding, Rossi. We want the heart." Gabriel's jaw locked so tightly it looked like granite. Declan Gallagher had figured it out. He didn't just know Gabriel had taken in a woman and a child. He knew why. In the twisted, psychological warfare of the Chicago Syndicate, destroying the living vessel of Sophia Rossi's heart would be the ultimate victory. A way to kill Gabriel's daughter a second time and break the Rossi Empire's morale forever. "Evelyn," Gabriel ordered, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Go upstairs. Lock the reinforced door to the south wing. Do not come out until I tell you to." Evelyn didn't argue. The reality of her situation had just detonated. If Gabriel hadn't dragged them into that car at the cemetery, She and Mia would be burning in the rubble of their living room right now. Over the next 48 hours, the Highland Park estate went into total lockdown. Gabriel called in 70 additional men, fortifying the perimeter with tactical precision. But the siege wasn't their biggest problem. On Thursday morning, a brutal winter storm rolled off Lake Michigan, grounding all private flights and severely delaying ground transport. Dr. Pendleton called Gabriel's secure line in a panic. The specialized, high-dose shipment of Mia's tacrolimus, custom compounded at a lab in Indianapolis, was stuck in transit. Mia had exactly 1 dose left. If she missed the Friday morning dose, her immune system would recognize the transplanted heart as a foreign object and begin attacking it. Acute cellular rejection would follow within hours. The courier is stuck at a distribution hub in Hammond, Indiana, Leo reported, pacing Gabriel's study. The roads are icing over, and Gallagher's spotters are watching the interstates. If we send a massive convoy, they'll know exactly what we're protecting. They'll ambush it. Gabriel stood by the window, watching the freezing rain lash against the glass. He imagined Mia upstairs, her small chest rising and falling, completely unaware of the biological time bomb ticking inside her. "We don't send a convoy," Gabriel said quietly, turning around. His eyes were devoid of mercy. "We send a decoy convoy north toward Wisconsin to draw Gallagher's heavy hitters. I will go to Hammond myself, in an unmarked vehicle, and bring the medication back." "Boss, that's suicide," Leo protested. "If Declan finds out you're alone in the storm, I won't be alone." "You're coming with me," Gabriel said, grabbing his tactical vest from the leather chair. "And I don't care if Declan Gallagher brings his entire army. Nobody stops that medicine from reaching this house." The journey to Hammond was a nightmare of black ice and blinding sleet. Gabriel drove a battered, nondescript Ford pickup truck, with Leo riding shotgun, an AR-15 resting across his knees. They reached the distribution hub just past midnight, securing the insulated medical lockbox without incident. But as they pulled out of the industrial park to head back to Chicago, a pair of heavy-duty SUVs roared out of an adjacent alley, their high beams blinding them in the storm. "Ambush!" Leo yelled, chambering around. Gunfire erupted, shattering the back window of the pickup. Gabriel slammed on the accelerator, the truck fishtailing violently on the ice. He didn't panic. His mind went into the cold, calculated hyper-focus that had made him the most feared man in the city. "Take the wheel," Gabriel barked. Leo reached across the console, grabbing the steering wheel as Gabriel drew his Sig Sauer, kicked his door open into the howling wind, and hung halfway out of the speeding truck. He aimed down the sights, ignoring the biting cold and the bullets sparking against the metal frame. He fired 3 rapid, precision shots. The driver of the lead SUV slumped forward. The massive vehicle swerved violently, clipping a concrete barrier and flipping spectacularly into the icy ditch, bursting into a fireball that illuminated the storm. The second SUV slammed on its brakes, the surviving attackers deciding that a suicide mission against the boss of Chicago wasn't worth the paycheck. Gabriel pulled himself back into the cabin, slamming the door shut. His left shoulder was bleeding profusely where a piece of shrapnel had torn through his coat, but his right hand was clamped firmly over the medical lockbox. "Drive," Gabriel grunted, breathing heavily. They made it back to the estate at 4 a.m. Evelyn was waiting in the grand foyer, pacing uncontrollably, when the front doors opened and Gabriel walked in, covered in freezing rain and blood, holding a small white cooler. She let out a sob of relief. He walked straight past his medical team, straight past his guards, and stopped in front of Evelyn. He pressed the cooler into her trembling hands. "She won't miss her dose," Gabriel rasped, his face pale from blood loss. Evelyn looked from the cooler to the dark stain spreading across Gabriel's shoulder. The terrifying Mafia boss had just bled for her child. He had risked his empire and his life for a little girl who wasn't his. "You're hurt," Evelyn whispered, her voice cracking. "It's nothing," he muttered, swaying slightly. Evelyn didn't think. She reached out, wrapping her arm around his uninjured waist to steady his massive frame. She looked up into his dark, exhausted eyes, feeling an undeniable, terrifying shift in her chest. She wasn't just grateful to him anymore. The fear was gone, replaced by a fierce, magnetic pull toward the broken man beneath the armor. "Let me help you," she said softly, refusing to let him pull away. For the first time in his life, Gabriel Rossi didn't fight back. He leaned into her touch, and in the quiet sanctuary of the blood-stained foyer, the ghost of his past finally made room for the desperate, undeniable pulse of the present. The bullet wound was clean, a grazing strike that had torn through the muscle of Gabriel's left shoulder without shattering the bone. In the quiet sanctity of his ground-floor study, Evelyn stood close to him, her hands surprisingly steady as she cleaned the laceration with antiseptic from the estate's trauma kit. Gabriel sat on the edge of his leather mahogany desk, stripped of his shirt, his heavily scarred torso illuminated by the amber glow of a desk lamp. He watched Evelyn's face. She was deeply focused, her brow furrowed, her dark hair falling softly over her shoulder. She didn't flinch at the sight of his scars, the bullet wounds and knife marks that mapped a lifetime of violence. Instead, her touch was profoundly gentle, an anchor in the storm of his chaotic existence. "You could have died tonight," Evelyn whispered, taping a pristine white gauze pad over the stitches Dr. Pendleton had just finished placing. Her voice was thick with unshed tears. "You didn't have to go yourself." "I did," Gabriel replied, his voice a low, gravelly vibration in the quiet room. He reached up with his uninjured right arm, his large hand gently capturing hers against his chest. "There is a leak in my organization, Evelyn." Declan Gallagher knew the exact route of that medical courier. He knew the time. The only people who had that manifest were my top capos and Chicago PD Commissioner Sullivan, whom I pay generously to keep the interstates clear. "Someone sold us out." Evelyn looked up, her breath catching as she met his intense, dark eyes. "If there's a traitor, then we aren't safe here either." Gabriel's thumb brushed softly over her knuckles. "You are safe, because tonight, the war ends." He stood up, towering over her, the lethal energy returning to his frame. "I know who the rat is, and I am going to use him to bury Gallagher." The twist had unraveled in Gabriel's mind on the icy drive back from Hammond. Silas, the lieutenant in charge of the Rossi family's operations at Navy Pier, was the only man who had requested a sudden shift change earlier that evening. Gabriel had fed Silas a piece of false information just before leaving, a fabricated vulnerability in the estate's security grid, suggesting the power would be cycled for maintenance at 3 a.m. Declan Gallagher wouldn't attack the fortress directly, but he would try to ambush Gabriel's men while they were distracted. Gabriel didn't wait for them to come. He set the trap on his own terms. At 2 a.m., the subterranean bowels of Lower Wacker Drive were a desolate stretch of concrete pillars and flickering fluorescent lights. The air smelled of exhaust, damp earth, and impending death. Gabriel stood in the center of the subterranean road, his dark overcoat concealing his freshly bandaged shoulder and the weapons strapped to his chest. Leo and a dozen of his most loyal, heavily armed enforcers were melted into the shadows behind the massive concrete support columns. The roar of high-performance engines echoed through the tunnel. 3 armored Cadillac Escalades screeched to a halt 50 yards away. The doors swung open, and 24 armed men poured out, forming a protective wall. From the center of the formation stepped Declan Gallagher. He was a vicious, unpredictable man, with a jagged scar running down his jawline and a supreme arrogance that blinded him to his own fatal flaws. He smirked, holding a suppressed pistol at his side. Beside him, trembling uncontrollably, was Silas. "I have to admit, Rossi," Declan called out, his voice echoing off the concrete, "I thought taking you down would be harder. But you went soft. A mob boss playing house with a sick kid and a desperate mother? You gave me the knife, Gabriel. I'm just twisting it." Gabriel didn't move. His expression was carved from ice. "You bought a traitor, Declan, but you forgot one crucial detail about my organization. I don't trust anyone who asks for a day off during a war." Declan's smirk faltered. He glanced at Silas, who suddenly realized he had been played. "You think you cornered me down here?" Gabriel's voice dropped, echoing with terrifying authority. "You are standing over a rigged gas line that my men severed 20 minutes ago. Every exit behind you has been blocked by my armored trucks. You didn't ambush me, Declan. You walked into a tomb. Panic rippled through Gallagher's men. Declan raised his weapon, his eyes wide with sudden realization. But Gabriel was faster. The movement was a blur of calculated violence. Gabriel drew his Sig Sauer and fired 2 consecutive, deafening shots. The first bullet struck Silas in the chest, the price of betrayal paid in full. The second bullet hit Declan Gallagher squarely between the eyes before the rival boss could even pull his trigger. Declan collapsed onto the cold concrete. Without their leader, the Gallagher men froze. Leo and Gabriel's enforcers stepped out from the shadows, their laser sights painting the surviving rivals in a sea of red dots. "Drop your weapons," Gabriel commanded, his voice slicing through the ringing silence of the tunnel. "Gallagher is dead. His territory belongs to the Rossi Syndicate now. Surrender, or join him." One by one, the clatter of heavy weaponry echoed against the pavement. The war was over. The king had defended his castle. By the time Gabriel returned to the Highland Park estate, the brutal winter storm had broken, leaving behind a crisp, silent blanket of white snow over the manicured grounds. The sun was just beginning to rise over Lake Michigan, casting a brilliant golden light across the water. Gabriel walked through the heavy front doors, stripping off his blood-spattered overcoat. He was exhausted, his body aching, but the crushing weight that had sat on his chest for 3 years was completely gone. He walked into the massive living room and stopped. Evelyn was asleep on the plush velvet sofa, curled up under a thick blanket. Tucked securely against her side was Mia, her blonde curls splayed over the pillow, her small chest rising and falling in a steady, perfect rhythm. Gabriel knelt beside the sofa. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a stray curl from Mia's forehead. The little girl stirred, her hazel eyes fluttering open. She looked at Gabriel, a sleepy, peaceful smile spreading across her face. "Mr. Gabriel," she murmured. "You came back. I will always come back, Piccola," Gabriel whispered, a profound warmth flooding his heart. Evelyn woke at the sound of his voice. She sat up, her eyes immediately scanning his face, searching for new injuries. When she saw the soft, unguarded look in his eyes, her shoulders dropped in relief. She reached out, her hand resting against his cheek. Gabriel leaned into her palm, closing his eyes. He had lost a daughter to the violence of his world. But miraculously, that same chaotic universe had brought her heart back to him, not to drown him in grief, but to give him a reason to live, to love, and to fiercely protect the new family he had found in the shadows. In the end, the ruthless Mafia boss didn't just find a little girl crying at a grave. He found his salvation. Gabriel Rossi built an empire on violence, but it was sustained by love. Evelyn and Mia brought warmth back to a cold fortress. Sophia's heart continued to beat, not just as a medical miracle, but as a steady drum guiding a broken man back to the light of life.